6 nights in Quito, thousands of new photos, no clean laundry, and still no finished videos. This was supposed to be my productive week between Easter Island and the Galapagos, but there was one obvious flaw in the plan. I was still in a brand new city, and at some point, I was going to have to close the laptop and actually go see it. Good morning. It's a lovely cold morning in Santiago, headed off to, where am I going? Panama, and then Quito. My plan was to use Quito as a down week. I'd just gotten back from Easter Island, and in less than a week, I'd be headed off for another big adventure in the Galapagos. When you're taking a trip for a week or two, you can get away with packing almost every day with back-to-back activities. But I wasn't really on vacation.
I was worried that I wouldn't be able to make my connection because it's now 8 minutes to boarding, but my gate was back there, and my new gate is there. So, left out.
I was living on the road now, and I was out of clean laundry and running behind on my projects. This week was really... I had planned it so that it was geared more towards me editing things, sort of like my week in Santiago, where I would just have a break to sort of like breathe and edit all the content that's sort of been backlogged now before I head off to the Galapagos. My camera roll had already grown by a few thousand, and I was getting nervous thinking about how much work it would be to sort through it all. So my grand plan was to have 1 week on, 1 week off. 1 big adventure week, 1 quieter week in a city with decent Wi-Fi. I figured that I could still balance editing with a little bit of sightseeing. Quito was the logical stop between Easter Island and the Galapagos, but my parents had also stayed there recently for their own trip to the Galapagos, and I was happy to follow in their footsteps. You'll actually see a bit of their footage here to supplement my own.
Hello there. We're here in Quito, and it's just after 6 o'clock. We're sort of living around Central Park here, panning around to see the mountains.
I was not the best at filming this week, and my dad kindly offered to save me. Friends and family were starting to ask me when I would post my first videos. I had 6 nights, and I thought plenty of time to get things done. The hostel was great. It had a large dining room, a garden outside, and it even had this big wooden treehouse where I could sit and work. I was so excited to come and work up here this morning. It's such like a cozy little nook in this hostel. This is one of the reasons why I actually ended up choosing this one. So. It was also the first hostel I'd stayed at where every dorm bed had privacy curtains. Luxury. I hadn't had any sort of privacy over the past few weeks. I know it doesn't sound like much, but having my own curtain was huge. I finally had my own space again. It was just a little wooden box with no soundproofing in a room of 6 other wooden boxes with a shared bathroom. But it was my little wooden box. The downside was that it was much less social than I'd expected. At the last few hostels, I'd quickly become friends with other women in my dorm. Here, I barely saw them. Whenever I entered the room, everyone's curtains were already drawn. It was great for getting some work done, but after arriving alone in a city, I was a little disappointed by how quiet it was. A hostel can be completely full and somehow still feel very quiet. This is one of the less visible parts of long-term travel. Editing a video requires more than opening a laptop for an hour. I needed to organize footage, write voiceovers, record them, and find somewhere quiet enough that the recording didn't include an entire hostel in the background. Especially being in a hostel and not having my own living space or like my own hotel room, it's a bit harder to do all the filming and to find kind of a quiet space to retreat to so I can do the voiceovers and everything. That's been a bit more of a challenge. Even on a day when I didn't go sightseeing, the work moved a lot more slowly than I think it would have at home. I was constantly changing locations, working with whatever setup I could create, and dealing with all the normal logistics of being in a different country. There was also a strange tension between working and exploring. Every hour I spent editing was an hour that I wasn't seeing Quito. I did eventually make a few friends, including one particularly loud American who was tormenting the rest of the dining hall with his sales calls. I tried switching on the noise cancellation for my AirPods. It didn't help. Eventually we got to chatting. We were both North Americans, both trying to balance work and travel. He became one of my co-working buddies for the rest of the week. Neither of us had done much sightseeing yet, so we started planning a few outings between work sessions. Getting out of the hostel and exploring the city helped me find a better balance, though I did still spend most of the week editing. I took things slowly during the first couple of days, drank plenty of water, and adjusted without any major problems. I was also more cautious about exploring than I had been in some of the previous cities. When I went to the main square, police officers had advised me to carry my backpack in front and put my phone away.
Be mindful of your phone, obviously.
Yeah.
I was using my phone as my primary camera, so that did make it a little bit challenging for me to film. Nothing happened, but the warning made me much more conscious, and it was nice having friends to go out on outings with. The first major site was the TelefériQo.
Maybe a bad time, but apparently this broke down like a couple weeks ago.
Oh,
Yeah,
like
people were
people
trapped
just
up here for
a
like a
while?
while. Yeah.
Sick.
Yeah.
Cool.
It only happens like once a week.
From the top, I could finally understand the scale and shape of Quito. The city stretches along a narrow valley, with development continuing much further than I had realized from the historic center. And that led to the biggest surprise of the week. Last night, I went out in the new modern area within Quito, and it was just, it blew my mind. Everything is like brand new. Before arriving, I had assumed that most of Quito would resemble the historic district. I wasn't expecting such a large, modern area filled with condos, taller buildings, busy roads, and restaurants. The historic center had felt quiet and almost self-contained. This part of Quito felt like a completely different city. Later in the week, I visited Bicentennial Park. Until 2013, the park had been the site of Quito's old airport. The airport had restricted building heights across the surrounding areas. But once it was relocated, those aviation restrictions were lifted. And that really helped to open the way for the taller towers that now define the modern skyline.
So this is a central park, and it's surrounded by buildings on all sides, just like New York, basically.
I also visited the Botanical Gardens. Botanical Gardens today! Which were absolutely gorgeous. Pocket of dense, lush vegetation in the middle of the city. None of these were huge, dramatic travel days. A little bit of exploring before returning to the hostel to keep working away through the night. But together, these days gave me a much broader impression of Quito than I'd had when I'd first arrived. One of my favorite parts of traveling alone is that it often makes you more open to meeting people.
Statue of Liberty.
You're gonna ruin all my videos. Solo travel doesn't necessarily mean experiencing every destination alone. By the end of the week, I still hadn't released any videos, and there was no dramatic moment where I closed my laptop and realized that I was finally caught up. I wasn't. It's hard to balance because I've also been, I haven't been working as hard as I could have because I've also been exploring the city and just, it's gonna be a bit hard to make sure that I stay on schedule. I can see it being a bit rough, especially during this initial period where it's a bit slow going. There's no rush to get the first video out. It's just, personally, I've set some goals for myself and I would like to do it sooner rather than later. So, I have some work cut out for me, but it's okay. I liked Quito, although I wouldn't say that I formed a particularly deep connection with the city. I think it's a good place to spend a few days, especially if you're traveling elsewhere in Ecuador, headed to the Galapagos or the Amazon. The historic center, the surrounding mountains, and the modern city center each offer something very different. For me, Quito's role in the trip was more personal and practical. It gave me somewhere to slow down without completely stopping. I made progress on my work and still made time to explore a city that turned out to be much more varied than I had expected. After 6 nights, it was time to close the laptop again and head back into a much faster kind of travel. Next stop, the Galapagos.